How's it going, everybody? We are going to get into some photosynthesis here. So, um, photosynthesis, big idea, how living organisms process energy. Okay, specifically those that can make their own food, right? You have to have light to make food, which sounds weird, but it's true. So we've had this slide already in the respiration notes. So you'll notice the same thing, that one equation feeds the other, right? And I talked about this relationship between the two equations and how it's really the engine of the planet. It drives everything. Um, if you look at some of these terms, so you have to have a constant input of energy, right? So you have heterotrophs, which are organisms that get food or organic molecules from other organisms, right? And so they're going to make energy through cellular respiration. And autotrophs, plants, along with a few other things, are able to make their own food, right? Energy from self. So that's autotroph. And they're going to build their organic molecules in order to get energy from those molecules, right? And they do this through photosynthesis, so consumers and producers. Plants are not the only autotrophs, like I mentioned a second ago. A lot of the oxygen, or most of the oxygen in the atmosphere, is generated by cyanobacteria, which is blue-green algae, and some aquatic protists. So lots of other ways, lots of other organisms that are doing photosynthesis and generating oxygen for the planet. It's not just trees, right? But if we keep treating our oceans really poorly and these guys don't make it, then that's going to severely decrease how much oxygen goes into the atmosphere, into the system, right? That's not good. So plant anatomy, a few things about plant anatomy as we go through here so you know where some of this stuff is taking place. It's going to take place in the leaves, right? Leaves are sun catchers, okay? Leaves just sit there and catch the sun and trap the energy, and they're full of these cells called mesophyll cells, which are then full of chloroplasts, right? And in the chloroplasts, you have chlorophyll. That's the pigment, which we'll get into. So you'll see a little bit of plant structure here, but we'll get into it in the next couple slides as well. So things like thylakoids and stroma and grana, they're going to show up here in a second, as will some of this other stuff. The stomata you see on the left, we're going to get into all this stuff down the road here. So chloroplast, a little bit about the structure, double membrane, stroma. Okay, let me grab this. Stroma is the space all in here, this orangish or peach colored space all within the chloroplast in there. Okay, so everywhere you see the gaps, everywhere that's not a thylakoid or a stack of thylakoids, meaning a grana, is going to be stroma. And so the chlorophyll molecules, the pigment, are inside those thylakoids, and that's where the electron transport chain is going to take place. And you get your ATP synthase going and your hydrogen gradient, and this should look really similar from respiration because a lot of the same processes, although not identical, but similar processes are going on here with the electron transport chain that also happens in plants. So here's kind of your labels, okay? And so, yeah, inside there, you're going to get a hydrogen gradient, and they're going to flow through that ATP synthase and make some ATP. A little bit about light. It's a form of electromagnetic radiation, so it's on the spectrum. And if you notice, you'll notice some other words on here. You'll recognize some other words. UV, for sure, you've heard of. X-rays, you've heard of. Probably gamma rays. Infrared, microwaves, and radio waves. Visible light is just this little section right here. And so if you blow this section up and look down here at visible light, and you look at the wavelengths of light along here and the numbers, this is where we get the rainbow from. But that whole thing only exists in this little bitty piece of the spectrum right there. It's a very small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Chlorophyll, so the pigment we've talked about, and it's going to react with the light energy to produce a color. And so you have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, so slightly different, ever so slightly. Notice that there's an important element in there, which is magnesium. Okay, magnesium's kind of right in the center of that chlorophyll, so plants need to have that. And then you can see in the upper left two circles of those chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, that's where they differ. The rest of it is the same, other than those little sections right there. And we'll talk a little bit more about A and B down the road here. So chlorophyll is not the only pigment. So we just had this season not too long ago, right, when we could see the different colors of leaves. And so chlorophyll being green, or I shouldn't say being green, but reflecting the wavelength of light that our eyes interpret as green, right? We see green most of the year, right? From spring all through summer, we see nice big green leaves. And so the chlorophyll is really dominating that. And when the sunlight hits it, it's going to reflect into our eye and we see green. And then this time of year, we see other colors. Well, what happened to the chlorophyll? Well, because of the time of year, um, the chlorophyll is breaking down. What do you think causes the chlorophyll to break down? I'll give you two options. Is it the length of day, or is it the temperature getting cooler that triggers those plants to then start breaking down the chlorophyll and preparing for winter? It's actually the length of day, the amount of sunlight is going to trigger chlorophyll to start breaking down. And the reason you see all of these other pretty colors is because you have carotenoids and xanthophylls and anthocyanins, which provide these other color pigments, okay, in some mixture, and you get the oranges and yellows and purples. And so these other pigments are there all year round. Okay, they are in those leaves all year round. There's just so much chlorophyll that the chlorophyll dominates, and that's the color we see or that our eyes see because of the wavelength of light. So why would we need these other pigments? Why are those things even in there if chlorophyll is there for photosynthesis? Well, if you think about how this works, okay, and we click through here, if you think about how light, right, light's going to hit, sunlight comes in here and hits, and the full rainbow of colors is going to come in. But if chlorophyll reflects green into our eyes, what color does it not absorb? Well, it doesn't absorb green, right? And that's why it either passes through, the green passes through, or it gets reflected one way or the other, and we see our eyes pick it up as green. Okay, so we have other pigments in there to absorb the green light, because if we see an orange leaf, that means it's absorbing all those colors except for orange. Same for yellow, same for red, right? But those yellows and oranges and reds, they're absorbing the green. So it's a way for the plants to absorb all of the colors of light, all of the wavelengths of light, and it makes it more efficient because you get more energy out of that. Okay? And so this graph over here kind of shows you like what chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are used to absorbing. So chlorophyll A can absorb some wavelengths a little bit lower. Chlorophyll B is going to be right in this area. Your carotenoids, your yellows, are going to get right in here, your yellows and oranges. Notice carotenoid, carrot, orange, right? That's that color. And then they do a little bit better too down here. They get a little bit better into these wavelengths as well. But there's a big gap here where we don't get as much from the green and yellow. We get a little bit, but not as much. We just don't have, plants don't have as much of those other pigments there to absorb all of that. So you get chloroplasts absorbing wavelengths of light, but not equally. They absorb red and blue wavelengths better. Okay? And so the other pigments there, though, expand the spectrum. So green is the least useful, but it still tries to use a little bit of it to help out. This is just how they figured it out. So again, if we look right here, you throw light through a prism and you get your rainbow, and you run it through a filter, right? And here's chlorophyll solution where only green light comes out, and here's your green chlorophyll solution all in here. Well, only green light's going to go through, right? And so you get high transmittance and low absorption, right? All of the light that was able to go through is coming in there. If we go down here and we look at the blue light, and now we have only blue wavelength of light is allowed to go through, and here's the chlorophyll, right? Well, look at the meter now. The meter's over here almost next to 0. Okay, and that's because the blue wavelength of light is being absorbed by the chlorophyll, and very little, you can see this very faint line, very little amount of light is getting through into that detector here, this little receptor. And so low transmittance, high absorption, because it's absorbing most of that other color of light. Chlorophyll is not going to absorb green light; it almost all goes through, right? That's why we see leaves as being green. Same idea, just another couple of graphs, but really the same idea. So we're going to move on. Nothing big here. Again, anabolic, right? Photosynthesis is building reaction. It's an endergonic process. You're putting energy in, mainly sunlight, okay, to make this happen. And you can see the CO2 is getting reduced into sugar, and water is being oxidized back into oxygen. And so it's really running in reverse of respiration, right? So for eukaryote, as we've been talking about, chloroplasts are there to take care of this. The main note on this slide is when you're talking about a prokaryote down here, they have a cell wall and they have a cell membrane. But they don't have organelles, right? They don't have chloroplasts. So how do prokaryotes photosynthesize? We'll look right here. Okay, a photosynthetic membrane right through there. Okay, so they have an extra membrane in there that they're going to run the electron transport chain in and have the reactions take place on that particular membrane in order to get their photosynthesis done. All right, so here's our roadmap. Okay, just like we had a roadmap in cellular respiration, there was one diagram that kind of showed you most of everything. This is the one here that shows you most of everything about photosynthesis. So let's break this down. So step one, the light reactions, okay? So light reactions, meaning sunlight, right? Starts up here with sunlight and it comes in, and let's orient ourselves. We're talking about the chloroplast here, right? So you have the light reactions going on, and you can tell by these stacks of discs here where this is taking place, which is the thylakoid membranes, okay? This is where it's happening. So light comes in, water comes in, right? That's a reactant of photosynthesis. You have to think about a plant. What do they need? They need light and water, right? We all do that. You put them by a window, you water your plants. So you have light reactions going on. What's going to leave? Well, plants give us oxygen, right? The O2 is going to go out for us. Okay. Then what did we generate? We took the sunlight, okay, and we converted that into ATP and NADPH. We'll talk about NADPH in 1 second. But these are energy molecules, right? So we took light energy and we converted it to chemical energy, light to chemical, okay? That's the conversion, light energy to chemical energy. And that's all what goes on in the light reactions. Trap the sunlight, convert that into chemical energy, okay? Bring in the water to do the reactions, give off oxygen for the planet, and then use the chemical energy, okay, right here. Trap the sunlight, use the chemical energy to power this. Power the Calvin cycle, which is going to take CO2 as an input and build sugar. Okay, so this is the idea here. Sunlight and water go into the light reactions, you give off oxygen, but you get chemical energy to power the sugar building reactions. Calvin cycle is there to build sugar. Okay, photosynthesis job is to build sugar. It's not to build this. Okay, photosynthesis job is not to build ATP, it's to build sugar so that it has a way to store the energy in those glucose bonds, and then it can use it when it needs to, right? Because plants have mitochondria. They're going to break down that sugar through cellular respiration later, okay? So Calvin cycle happens in the stroma, where this one happens in the thylakoid. So the stroma is the space, right? And it's going to build sugar using the energy, the ATP and the NADPH from the light reactions. That's the big idea, okay? That's pretty much everything right there, except for a few details that we're going to need to go through, okay? This is actually the ETC of respiration. Just wanted to remind you this took place, okay? Mitochondrial ETC, lots of reactions happening there in the membrane, ultimately to build the proton gradient and have it go through the ATP synthase, and we make some ATP. That same thing is going to happen slightly differently, but same idea, same ETC type thing is going to happen in photosynthesis. Okay, so here is the ETC of photosynthesis. So let me grab my pen. Let me get all my words up here before I do, because it doesn't let me click after I grab my pen. So the ETC in photosynthesis. So here, let's orient ourselves. Thylakoid membrane, right? You can see the bilayer right here. Okay, you can see the phospholipid bilayer. So here's the membrane going all the way around, right? This is our membrane. of the thylakoid, one disc, okay? And you can see all of these big proteins sitting in here. So this is the ETC, right? This protein line running through the membrane. That is the ETC of photosynthesis, okay? So chloroplasts are going to transform light energy into chemical energy. So sunlight comes in, and we'll get to some of these other details in a minute. But sunlight comes in, and it's going to hit this, and then we are going to split some water, which we'll get to in a minute. That is the key step, splitting the water, because it generates everything we need for everything else. But the electrons are going to roll through here, and ultimately NADP is going to accept the electrons. Remember, if you're going to follow the electrons, follow the hydrogens, right? So NADP becomes NADPH because it took on electrons. So here is our electron shuttle bus for photosynthesis. Remember in cellular respiration, we had NADH, okay? In photosynthesis, we have NADPH, okay? That should never be missed on a test, right? NADPH is for photosynthesis, right? They both start with, or both have a P in them, okay? NADH is for cellular respiration. They do not cross over, okay? NADH stays with respiration, NADPH stays with photosynthesis. So, and then down here, when we build this hydrogen gradient, it's going to go through the ATP synthase and generate some ATP down here. And both of those, remember, are going to head off to the Calvin cycle to build some sugar. So you're going to keep seeing some of these slides. So if you're not quite there yet, it's okay. You're going to keep seeing some of this stuff. We're going to look at some details here. So photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Okay? So these photosystems are what trap the sunlight, right? They come in and the sunlight is gathered here or directed here. And chlorophyll A is going to absorb around 680 nanometers, so the wavelength of red light. And then chlorophyll B is also going to absorb some red light, but around 700 nanometers. And so what happens is when the light comes in, the photons come in, they're going to excite these electrons that are sitting here in these little receptors. And the electrons are then going to get excited and start getting ready to move and transfer. And we'll get to that in just 1 minute. Oh, there's the reaction center. So here's a zoomed in picture of what happens. So you can see right in here, you can see all the little dots sitting on top of photosystem 2 right here, okay? So photosystem 2 is this big purple guy right here, the big purple protein sitting in that membrane. That's photosystem 2. The light hits those photons right there, okay? And then we have, which has chlorophyll A in it. Photosystem 1 has chlorophyll B in it. Incidentally, photosystem 2 comes before photosystem 1 in the process. And there's actually a pretty decent explanation for that. Why wouldn't they put 1 in front of 2? That makes no sense. Well, photosystem 1 was discovered before photosystem 2. And so when they discovered photosystem 2 and it happened to be in front of it in the process, they just left the names. Photosystem 2 was discovered later. And so it ended up in front of photosystem 1 in the process, but it was just the order in which they were discovered. So kind of interesting. So here, so photosystem 2 is going to be where the light comes in, the electrons get excited, and those are the electrons that are going to travel through this electron transport chain right here. And then they're going to hit photosystem 1, and the light's going to come in, and they're going to get excited again. They're going to keep going until we get through all the way to NADPH. Okay, that's the general idea. So here's a little bit more details yet. Okay, so the light comes into photosystem 2. You can see a bunch of green circles there at the bottom. That's photosystem 2. And the sunlight comes in. Here comes the sunlight. And there's our electrons, right, in the red circles. They're getting excited, and now they're showing them going up because they're kind of going up in energy level, and they're going to move on to something else. There's what we call the primary electron acceptor up at the top. It's just a molecule, but we don't need to really dig into what that is. Notice the 2 dark circles now in the middle of the photosystem. That's to indicate that the electrons have now left. Okay, so now there's a void. Okay, those black circles are void of electrons now. Okay, So what's going to happen is, remember, plants need water, right? Plants have to have water. So the splitting of water releases the oxygen. So this splitting of water becomes the most important thing that goes on to drive the light reactions, okay? There's a lot of things that have to happen. So the first thing when you split the water is the electrons are going to get replaced right there, okay? The void, those E's, those black circle E's, those are going to get replaced. So these electrons from the water now are going to come in and replace right here. And then that's going to keep the chain going. Okay, that's going to send some more electrons up to the primary acceptor. Okay, so then here's what happens when you split water. Over here on the right side, you have your hydrogens getting split off, and those are going to have electrons and protons, right? Just like we did in the cell respiration one. Well, where do you think the oxygen's going to go? So pause this halfway through here. Here's your oxygen, right? Oxygen's going to go out, right? That's for us, okay? And over here, your hydrogen gets split into 2 electrons. Those are going to fill the void. And then what do you think is going to happen with our protons? We need to build some ATP, so a hydrogen gradient is usually pretty good for that, okay? So we're going to build up a hydrogen gradient, and it's going to look like this, where we have a bunch of hydrogen. Oops. We have a bunch, go back, bunch of hydrogen being filled up in these spaces up here. Okay, we have a bunch of hydrogens, and they're going to flow through the ATP synthase and build some ATP. Okay, that's all from splitting of water. Splitting of water provides the electrons to run the electron transport chain in order to make NADPH. Hydrogen protons build up in order to form the gradient to build ATP, and the oxygen gets released for us. Thank you, plants. So here's a little bit more about the electron transport chain. You do not need to know the players in this, okay? You don't need to know those complexes, but it's going to slide showing that the electrons are coming down their energy level little by little, okay? We have a little ATP synthase going on, a little bit more. And then here's the photosystem 1, okay, which remember is the second one. And the electrons are going to come all the way down the chain, and they're going to hit, and sunlight's going to excite those, and now they're going to go up to another electron acceptor. But now we have a void here, but remember we have more electrons coming down the pike from water being split. Okay, so those are going to fill the void. Okay, whoops, going a little quick. Those are going to fill the vacancy, and then they're going to get excited when sunlight hits those, and they're going to leave, and then the next ones are going to come down the chain and fill there. And you can see how this chain, the electron transport chain, is going to keep going. And then ultimately, the electrons are driving the creation of NADPH, which is going to be the shuttle bus, and to take the electrons over to the Calvin cycle so that we can build some sugar. Okay, so that's kind of that top side of the reaction. So here's your electrons getting to NADPH, throwing that in the piggy bank that you're used to seeing. Okay, and we have some chemiosmosis going on, right? We have the hydrogen gradient. So chemiosmosis right here in the middle of the diagram. Water's getting split, oxygen's going out. We have a bunch of hydrogens filling the chamber right here, filling the inside of the thylakoid, the space, and it's going to go out through the ATP synthase, and we're going to make some ATP, which will then go to the Calvin, along with this guy that we just made from the electrons going through. Okay, so I think this one makes quite a bit of sense, actually. It's pretty easy to follow the photosynthesis stuff once you've gone through respiration. So just throwing up some pop-ups there of stuff that I've already said. So ETC uses light energy to produce ATP and NADPH, goes to the Calvin. Photosystem 2 absorbs the light. The excited elastron passes from chlorophyll to the primary electron acceptor. You have to replace that, so the enzyme extracts electrons from water and supplies them to chlorophyll. Splitting the water gets oxygen to combine with other oxygen, and then it's going to get released out into the atmosphere for us and other organisms, which we greatly appreciate. So there's a couple different types of photophosphorylation here. Remember, it's the light that's driving that phosphorylation this time. And so we have non-cyclic. Everything we've talked about to this point is non-cyclic. Okay, we haven't done anything except for non-cyclic right now. So in this case, electrons are passed in a linear fashion. They do not go back. Okay, it makes both of these. It makes ATP and NADPH, and it requires water. These are all factors of non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Okay, and so what this means is that here is your photosystem 2, and the electrons are going to go this way, and then they're going to go down here, and then they're going to go up, and then finally they're going to end up at NADPH, right? There's no circling back at all. It just goes linear, okay? That's what the non-cyclic means. And this is kind of a little cartoon, little construction cartoon of what's going on. If you look at if you look at this guy, same idea that I just showed you. You have the photon down here, or the sunlight, exciting the electron, and he comes up here to the first construction worker, which, by the way, this is photosystem 2. I don't know if you can see it on the bottom of the slide there. Oh, goodness. That's supposed to be a PS and then a 2, so photosystem 2. And this is photosystem 1. Okay, and so the electrons get passed down the electron transport chain, and they throw it through this little wheel on the cartoon like a mill, so that we're generating ATP right here. And then this is going to excite the next level at PS1. It's going to throw the electrons up, and then this guy's going to throw it in the bucket for NADPH, right? And that's typically that's very linear. Things are just getting passed from one to the other, and there's no circling back. Okay, you've heard me say that a few times. So now we have to talk about why would it circle back. Okay, so there is cyclic photophosphorylation as well. And in this case, what goes on is when you get to the final step here, when you get to this, right? And normally when it gets to there, all it does is throw it down here, and we end up at NADPH, right? No problem. Except for sometimes this thing kicks it back this way. Okay, and it goes back through, and then it picks up and goes up here again, and then it might kick it back through again. Okay, so what this is doing is by throwing it back this way, we can generate more of this. We can generate more ATP. So electrons are transferred to FD, which stands for ferredoxin, don't need to know that, instead of NADP+. And so they cycle back to make more ATP, but none of this. Whoa, what just happened? Here we go. So they don't make any of this, okay? No NADPH this time. So in cyclic, you only make this, okay? You're not making any NADPH because there's no handoff of the electron to make it. This part doesn't happen, okay? No water required to do this, okay? You don't have to have the water to do that because you don't need any more electrons. You just keep cycling them back through. So here's the same construction idea, and obviously it's pretty much all the same, except for this guy at the top over here. He doesn't put it into the bucket. He chucks it back this way, and then it comes down the ramp again and through the mill and makes some more ATP. Okay, and so it's going a different way. So why would it do this? Okay, well, when you examine what's going on in photosynthesis, you have to have 18 ATP and you have to have 12 NADPH in order to run the Calvin cycle, okay, per glucose. And so 18 is more than 12. So you have to make more ATP than you do NADPH. If you go one for one, you'll never catch up. You'll never have enough to actually build it. And so sometimes you have to run the cyclic portion of it to generate some more ATP to catch up. Okay, it uses more ATP than it does NADPH. It's just a thing. So here's a little diagram for you. And when you're talking this one, okay, that is non-cyclic, right? That's the normal way, how it keeps going and makes NADPH. But if we overlay this part of it and we don't go that way and we put cyclic photophosphorylation, then the diagram looks more like this, okay? And we keep making some ATP. Photosynthesis summary. So think about the equation of photosynthesis. Where did the energy come from? Hopefully you're saying the sun. Where did the electrons come from? Splitting of water. Where did the water come from? You could say a lot of different things for that. You could say rain, you could say ground. I mean, basically it's the groundwater, right? For the plant, comes up through the roots. We can say that. Where did the oxygen come from? Splitting of water, right? You split the water and that oxygen goes out for us. Where did the O2 go? Just said it, goes out. Where did the protons come from? Hopefully you're catching on here, splitting of water, right? As far as the light reactions go, if there's a question about the light reactions, the first half of photosynthesis, and you don't know, you should guess splitting of water, because it's right for 3 questions. Where did the ATP come from? Well, the gradient after you split the water and you build up that gradient of the protons. The protons run through the ATP synthase, make some ATP, and what will it be used for? Calvin cycle to build sugar. Where did the NADPH come from? It accepts the electron in the electron transport chain, and then it will also be used for building sugar in the Calvin cycle. And stay tuned for the Calvin cycle. I am going to call this the end of part 1 for photosynthesis, and we're going to stop here. We're about halfway through, but I always get concerned that the video will not work, so I don't want to talk for an hour and not have it work. So hopefully this first half worked, and hopefully this helped you learn the first part of photosynthesis. I will be back for part 2. See ya.